You've been strutting around this gated neighborhood like the princess who finally gets the family property transferred into her name. Haven't you, Lauren? That big promised future I kept dangling, the house deed, the investment accounts, the whole cushy setup I swore would set you up for life, it never existed. Not for you. Your stepmother, Cynthia, and I made sure of that years ago. We had bigger plans for those assets. Plans that didn't involve propping up your little independent life. And those medical records for your grandfather, we adjusted them just enough to show the doctors how critical his needs were. Necessary paperwork, really. You actually believed you'd walk away with everything while we sat back empty-handed. How bitterly hilarious. The truth is, you've always been the one we kept on the hook, and now the hook is gone. Hi, my name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 33 years old. I sat across from my father in the sunlit study of his sprawling house in the high-end, gated neighborhood of Scottsdale, Arizona, the kind of place where every lawn looked like it had been vacuumed, and every neighbor pretended they weren't watching. The words hung in the air like cheap cologne, thick and impossible to ignore. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face neutral the way I'd learned to do after years of his games. This wasn't some sudden blow, it was the moment everything I'd quietly suspected finally slapped me in the face. For the last 5 years, my father had dangled this golden promise like a carrot on a stick. Lauren, once we sort the family assets, that corner lot with the view is yours. Cynthia and I want you settled here in the community building, something real. He'd said it at birthdays, holidays, even during quiet dinners when my stepmother nodded along with that tight little smile of hers. I'd believed him. I'd turned down 2 solid job offers out of state because he swore the support was coming, swore the paperwork was almost ready. I had poured my savings into plans for a small consulting firm right here in Scottsdale, imagining the stability of owning property in the same exclusive enclave where the family had lived for decades. But today, in this study that smelled of leather and false sincerity, he'd finally dropped the mask. My stepmother Cynthia stood behind him, arms crossed, looking every bit the woman who had slid into our lives 15 years ago and slowly rewritten the rules. She didn't speak, she never needed to when my father was performing, but her eyes said everything. She had always seen me as the leftover from his first marriage, the one who asked too many questions and expected too much. I let out a short, bitter laugh that surprised even me. So, the promised future was just smoke, Dad. All those late-night talks about securing the Mitchell legacy for the right daughter, just a way to keep me close and useful. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking like it was laughing too. Useful is exactly right. You've been handling your grandfather's medical appointments and paperwork for years. We let you play the dutiful granddaughter because it kept things running smoothly, but the assets, those were never going to you. Cynthia and I have Tyler to think about. He's starting his own venture, and the family needs to stay focused. Tyler, my half-brother Cynthia's son from a previous relationship, the golden boy who could do no wrong. He wasn't even in the room, but his name landed like another jab. I felt my jaw tighten, the sarcastic edge in my voice sharpening without effort. Right. Tyler's venture, the one that's already burned through 2 rounds of seed money that mysteriously came from grandfather's accounts. Funny how those medical records suddenly showed urgent needs right when the transfers happened. My father's eyes narrowed, but before he could fire back, Cynthia stepped forward, her voice smooth as silk. Lauren, don't be dramatic. Your grandfather's health has been declining. We had Dr. Elena Vargas review everything and make the proper notations. It's all above board. Dr. Elena Vargas, the family physician who had been treating grandfather for the past decade. I'd met her a handful of times, always polite. Always professional. But something in Cynthia's tone made my skin crawl. I filed the name away the way I filed every suspicious detail these days. The conversation dragged on for another 20 minutes of my father's cutting remarks and Cynthia's passive little digs. By the time I left the study and stepped out into the manicured courtyard of their property, my hands were shaking, not from tears, but from a cold, sarcastic fury that had been building for years. I'd spent 33 years being the reliable one, the one who showed up, who fixed things, who never complained. And for what? A promise that was never real. Later that evening, back in my own smaller townhouse on the edge of the same gated community, I poured a glass of wine and stared at my laptop. I had been quietly managing grandfather's affairs for months, ever since his health started slipping. He trusted me more than anyone, and I had the login credentials to the family trust accounts he'd set up before things got complicated. I logged in expecting to see the usual balances. Instead, I noticed several recent transfers, large ones that didn't match any medical bills I'd seen. My stomach dropped. I dug deeper, cross-referencing dates with the adjusted medical records Cynthia had mentioned. That's when the first mini cliffhanger hit. An email notification popped up from an unknown sender with the subject line, "You need to see this before they delete everything." Attached were scanned documents showing alterations to grandfather's records, dates, changed, diagnoses, exaggerated, all signed off by Dr. Vargas under pressure. The sender was anonymous, but the timestamp was recent. My heart hammered. Someone else knew. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called my trusted colleague and occasional legal advisor, Marcus Reed. He'd helped me with small business filings before and had become a quiet ally in the family drama. "Marcus, I need you to look at something off the books. It involves altered medical records and missing trust funds." He agreed to meet me at a quiet cafe just outside the gates. Over coffee, he reviewed the files I'd forwarded. "This isn't just sloppy paperwork, Lauren. These changes were deliberate. If your father and stepmother pushed Dr. Vargas to sign off on this, it could be fraud. And the transfers, they line up exactly with dates when Cynthia was listed as power of attorney on a temporary basis." I leaned back, the bitter taste of sarcasm rising again. "Of course they do. They promised me the world, then used grandfather's health as cover to siphon everything for Tyler and their own retirement fantasy. The promised future never existed. It was always a stall tactic to keep me compliant." Marcus nodded, his expression grave. "I'll dig discreetly. But Lauren, if this escalates, you might need to consider protecting yourself legally. You're the one grandfather actually trusted with the long-term planning." We parted with a plan he would quietly reach out to a contact at the bank for transaction logs. I drove back through the gated community's wrought iron entrance, feeling a strange mix of rage and grim determination. The community looked as perfect as ever. Perfect lawns, perfect neighbors waving from golf carts. But underneath it all, my family's house of cards was starting to tilt. That afternoon, I confronted my father again, this time at the community clubhouse during a so-called family lunch he had insisted on. Cynthia was there, along with Tyler, who smirked from across the table like he already owned the place. Aunt Margaret, my father's sister, and one of the few relatives who had always been straight with me, sat quietly beside me. She had flown in for the week and sensed the tension immediately. "Dad," I said, voice low, but laced with sarcasm, care to explain why grandfather's medical file suddenly shows a diagnosis that didn't exist 6 months ago, and why the trust accounts are lighter by several $100,000. His face flushed. Cynthia's hand tightened around her wine glass. Tyler actually laughed. Big sister's playing detective again. Before my father could launch into another lecture, Aunt Margaret spoke up. "David, I've seen some of the paperwork. This doesn't look right." The table went silent. My father shot her a warning look, but the damage was done. That was the second mini cliffhanger of the day, the moment the family facade cracked in public. I left the lunch early, heart pounding with a bitter satisfaction. As I walked back to my townhouse, my phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Lauren, I found something bigger. Hidden emails between your father and Cynthia. They go back 2 years. They never planned to honor any promise to you. They were using the support talk to keep you managing grandfather's care while they positioned Tyler as the real beneficiary. The emails. The mid-story twist I hadn't seen coming. My hands shook as I pulled over in the shaded parking area near the community's artificial lake. I opened the attachments Marcus had forwarded. There it was, in black and white, my father writing to Cynthia, keep Lauren, busy with the old man's appointments. Once the records are adjusted and the funds are redirected, we tell her the promise was always conditional. Tyler needs it more. I sat there staring at the screen, the sarcastic laugh bubbling up again. "Well, Dad," I muttered to myself, "the future you promised really was fictional. Congratulations on the plot twist." But I knew this was only the beginning. The investigation was about to reveal everything, and I had no intention of letting them rewrite the ending. I sat there staring at the screen, the sarcastic laugh bubbling up again. "Well, Dad," I muttered to myself, "the future you promised really was fictional. Congratulations on the plot twist." But I knew this was only the beginning. The investigation was about to reveal everything, and I had no intention of letting them rewrite the ending. I forwarded the entire email chain to Marcus immediately, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a bitter kind of satisfaction. Then I called my attorney, Nicole Torres, the sharp-witted family law specialist I'd quietly retained 2 days earlier when the first red flags appeared. She answered on the second ring, her voice calm but alert. "Lauren, talk to me. What's happened now?" "Those emails Marcus flagged, I have the full thread. My father and stepmother spelled it out in black and white. They kept dangling that house and those assets like bait, so I'd stay here managing grandfather's care while they funneled everything toward my half-brother Tyler. The promised future was never on the table. It was always a stall tactic." Nicole exhaled slowly. "Send them over right now. Combined with the altered medical records, this is textbook undue influence. We can move to freeze the remaining trust accounts and demand an independent audit. I'll loop in my contact at the bank, James Harlan. He handles high net worth trusts and won't tip anyone off." The next morning, I met Nicole at her sleek downtown office, the kind of place where the walls seemed to whisper discretion. She laid the printed emails across the conference table like evidence in a trial. "These are devastating, Lauren. Your father literally wrote that keeping you busy and hopeful was the smartest part of the plan. They never intended to honor a single promise." I crossed my arms, the sarcasm rising like acid in my throat. Of course they didn't. I spent years turning down better opportunities, pouring my savings into plans that would keep me right here in this gated community because they swore the support was coming. Also, they could quietly rewrite grandfather's medical files and redirect the money. Nicole's eyes flicked to the screen as another message from Marcus popped up. "Your colleague just confirmed the doctor's office manager, a woman named Paula Ruiz, is willing to talk off the record. She overheard my stepmother pressuring Dr. Vargas to sign off on those changes. This is escalating fast." We didn't waste time. That afternoon, James Harlan joined us via secure video from the bank. He was a measured man in his late 50s, the kind who'd seen every family betrayal imaginable. "Ms. Mitchell, the transaction logs match the email timestamps exactly. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were moved out of accounts that grandfather had explicitly flagged for your benefit in the original planning documents. The medical record alterations provided the cover they needed to justify it as necessary care expenses." The words landed like another slap, but I met his gaze with the steady firmness I'd been practicing. So the big legacy talk was just theater. My father needed me compliant, and my stepmother needed the funds flowing to Tyler without questions. James nodded grimly. "I've flagged the accounts internally. Any further attempts to move money will trigger an automatic hold and notify the trust's co-executors, which, based on these documents, should include you." I left the bank with a thicker folder and a colder resolve. That evening, I drove back into the gated neighborhood and straight to my father's sprawling house. My stepmother answered the door, her perfectly arched brows shooting up when she saw me. "Lauren, we weren't expecting you." "Funny how that works," I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. My father was in the living room, drink in hand, and my half-brother Tyler was sprawled on the couch, scrolling his phone. Aunt Margaret had stopped by for dinner and sat quietly in the corner, watching everything with quiet concern. My father set his glass down with a deliberate clink. Back again, still playing detective, I see. How bitterly predictable. I pulled out my phone and opened the email thread, holding it up so the screen glowed between us. Predictable, try documented. These emails where you and Cynthia admit the promised house and assets were never going to me. They were just the hook to keep me here while you altered grandfather's records and funneled the money to Tyler. The future you kept selling me, pure fiction. Cynthia's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Oh, please, you always were so dramatic about family obligations. We let you believe what you wanted because it kept things running smoothly." My father leaned forward, his voice dripping with that familiar cold sarcasm. "You really thought we'd hand you prime property in this neighborhood after everything we've done to build a real future here? You're the one who chose your little independent path, Lauren. We simply made sure the assets went where they belong to someone who understands loyalty." Tyler snorted from the couch. "Yeah, big sister, maybe stop pretending you're the victim and accept that some of us actually contribute." Aunt Margaret cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the tension. "David, I've seen copies of those records. This isn't right, and you know it." The room went still for a beat. My father's face hardened. "Stay out of this, Margaret. This is between me and my daughter." I felt the bitter laugh rise again, but I kept it contained. Between us, it stopped being between us the moment you used grandfather's health as an excuse to steal what was promised. The investigation is already moving, Dad. The bank is involved. The emails are out there. You can keep throwing sarcasm around, but the truth is finally catching up. He stood slowly, eyes narrowing. You think you can threaten me in my own house after all the years we carried you? Fine. Keep digging, but if you push this, the family gatherings end today. No more invitations, no more support. Nothing. You'll be the one standing alone outside these gates, wondering why you couldn't just fall in line. The words stung exactly the way he intended, but the sarcasm in my reply came out steady and firm. Alone sounds pretty good right about now. At least it's honest. I turned to leave, but my phone buzzed in my hand. It was James Harlan from the bank. I stepped into the hallway to take it heart-hammering. Lauren, we just received an urgent notice. The trust's co-executor review has been fast-tracked. There's a formal meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning at the bank reckoning day, as they're calling it internally. And there's something else. A new document surfaced in the audit. It mentions another potential beneficiary we weren't aware of. Someone named Sophia Lang. We need you there immediately. I hung up the words echoing in my ears. Another beneficiary. The ground felt like it was shifting again, but this time the shift felt like it might finally be in my favor. Or maybe it was just one more layer of the lie unraveling. As I walked out the front door into the perfectly manicured night, my stepmother's voice followed me from the doorway. You'll regret this, Lauren. Families don't survive this kind of betrayal. I didn't turn around. The sarcasm in my own thoughts was the only armor I needed now. But deep down, the emotional weight of it all, the years of false promises, the altered records, the emails that proved everything pressed heavier than I wanted to admit. The reckoning was here, and whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let them rewrite my ending. I didn't turn around. The sarcasm in my own thoughts was the only armor I needed now. But deep down, the emotional weight of it, all the years of false promises, the altered records, the emails that proved everything pressed heavier than I wanted to admit. The reckoning was here, and whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let them rewrite my ending. The next morning, the reckoning arrived exactly as James had warned. I walked into the bank's private conference room downtown with Nicole at my side and Marcus already waiting at the long, polished table. Aunt Margaret had driven in early to stand with me, and Paula Ruiz, the doctor's office manager, who had finally agreed to speak, sat quietly in the corner clutching a folder. The evidence was stacked in neat piles: printed emails, time-stamped medical record changes, bank transaction logs. My heart beat steady but loud. I was done hoping. I was here to end it. My father, Cynthia, and Tyler arrived 10 minutes late, striding in like they still owned the room. My father's eyes locked straight on me. Lauren, still dragging this family embarrassment into public. How bitterly predictable. You really think a few pieces of paper are going to undo years of actual loyalty? Cynthia crossed her arms, that tight smile never reaching her eyes. We told you last night you'd regret pushing this. The medical notations were necessary. Your grandfather's care required adjustments. Tyler has real plans for those assets. You chose your little independent life, now live with it. Tyler just smirked from his chair. Big sister playing hero again? Cute. Before I could answer, the door opened one more time. A woman I had never met stepped in mid-40s, sharp suit, carrying her own thick envelope. She introduced herself calmly as Sophia Lang grandfather's long-lost niece from a branch of the family no one had spoken about in decades. Sophia had been quietly named in an earlier version of the trust documents my father and Cynthia had worked so hard to bury. She had the originals. She had come because the bank's urgent notice had reached her too. The room went dead silent for half a second. Then my father exploded. This is ridiculous. Some stranger shows up claiming blood, and suddenly we're supposed to believe fairy tales. Lauren, you orchestrated this entire circus, didn't you? Sophia didn't flinch. She placed her documents on the table beside Nicole's stack. These are the unaltered medical records from 2 years ago, before any changes were made, and these emails match the ones already in evidence. Your father and stepmother pressured Dr. Vargas to exaggerate diagnoses so they could justify pulling funds that were always earmarked for Lauren's benefit and for the family foundation grandfather wanted. The promised future you sold her was never real. It was a stall tactic while you redirected everything to Tyler. James Harlan cleared his throat and began the formal presentation. Every transfer, every altered note, every line in those hidden emails was laid out in black and white. The investigation had revealed all of it. Hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned under the cover of medical needs. The power of attorney paperwork they had quietly extended without grandfather's full awareness. The way they had kept me compliant with talk of property and legacy while they built Tyler's future on lies. My father's face went from red to pale. Cynthia's hands started to shake. "This is slander," she hissed, voice rising. "Lauren, you bitter little ingrate. After everything we let you believe, after we kept you close to the family, you repay us by dragging strangers into our private business." I met her eyes, my voice low but firm, the sarcasm sharp enough to cut. "Private. You made it public the moment you started altering records and laughing behind my back about how long I'd stay on the hook. The emails prove it. The medical files prove it. You stole the future you promised me so Tyler could keep playing entrepreneur. And now the bank knows. The trust knows. It's over." Tyler tried to jump in, but Sophia cut him off with quiet authority. "Grandfather's true wishes were clear in the documents I have. The assets stay protected. Lauren retains her role as co-trustee. Any further attempts to move funds will be reported immediately. The community will hear about this if it continues. Gossip travels fast in a gated neighborhood like yours." The emotional breakdown hit them all at once. My father slammed his hand on the table, voice cracking with rage and panic. "You think you've won? You'll never set foot in another family gathering. We're done. The Mitchell name is closed to you. No more invitations, no more support, nothing. You'll be the outsider staring at empty gates for the rest of your life." Cynthia started crying ugly, angry tears that smeared her perfect makeup. "How could you do this to us after we raised you? After we gave you a place in this community, you've destroyed everything we built." Tyler just sat there stunned, the smirk finally gone, muttering about how unfair it all was. Aunt Margaret watched it unfold without a word, but her quiet nod toward me said everything. I felt the wave hit me, then not anger, but a raw, shaking emotional release that had been building for years. My eyes burned. I let the tears come for one brief moment in that sterile conference room, not because I was broken, but because the weight of every false promise, every sarcastic jab, every hidden manipulation finally lifted. I wiped my face, drew a steady breath, and stood up. "You're right. About one thing, Dad," I said, voice firm and laced with the bitter edge I'd earned. "Family gatherings are over. Permanently. I choose silence now, the kind that protects my heart instead of feeding your lies. Self-respect comes first. I'm walking away with exactly what Grandfather actually wanted me to have: the truth and the ability to move forward without carrying your toxicity." Nicole slid the final papers across the table. The remaining assets were frozen and secured under the original intent. Sophia and I would co-manage the trust moving forward, honoring Grandfather's real vision for a small scholarship fund for young women in business. No more redirection. No more games. I walked out of that bank into the bright Arizona sun with Nicole and Marcus flanking me and Aunt Margaret right behind. Sophia caught up in the parking lot, offering a quiet handshake and the promise of future collaboration. "He always spoke highly of you," she said simply. "You did right by him." I drove back through the gated neighborhood one last time, past the perfect lawns and the houses that had once felt like part of my future. I didn't stop at my father's street. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The emotional breakdown I'd allowed myself in the conference room had cleared the last of the fog. What remained was steady inner triumph, quiet, unshakable, and entirely mine. 6 months later, I had relocated my consulting work to a new city 2 hours away. The townhouse sold quickly. I kept in touch with Aunt Margaret and Sophia, but the rest of the family was radio silence. No invitations, no calls, no more false promises. The gatherings ended the day I chose myself, and the silence that followed felt like the deepest kind of peace. I learned the hard lesson that self-respect comes first, even when it costs you the family you thought you had. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone is to walk away and let the silence protect your heart. The promised future they stole never existed, but the one I built for myself is real. Thank you for listening to my story. Would you choose yourself if the people who promised you everything turned out to be the ones taking it all away?